All right, so welcome everyone to another deep dive. And this one is going to be a real treat because,
Mm.
well, frankly, you folks put it together. I mean, you sent in this awesome collection of material all focused on this artist, Bob Camblin.
Yeah.
But talking about like his own quotes and little insights into his life, even excerpts from his writings, and a YouTube discussion about one of his pieces. It's really impressive. So our mission here is to kind of unpack all of this and see what we can learn about this guy, his art, and the ideas that really made him tick.
Yeah, right off the bat, what really hits you is how much of an enigma this Bob Camblin is. I mean, he earned a lot of respect from other artists, and when one of his pieces does pop up for sale, they're really sought after. But he always seemed to operate kind of in the shadows a little bit. That description of him as a mystical trickster figure really makes you think about someone who wasn't afraid to break the mold.
Totally. And the sheer range of his art is
Right.
is really something else. We're talking about everything from oils and acrylics to watercolors, drawings, prints, even works on painted paper.
Yeah.
It's clear this guy was on a long and very experimental artistic journey. And it seems like his book, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, is going to be really important for us to understand where he was coming from. So we'll definitely circle back to that.
Yeah, for sure. And to give us some grounding, you also sent in some key biographical info. So we know that he was born in Oklahoma in 1928, built a really solid art foundation at the Kansas City Art Institute, and even scored a Fulbright to study in Italy, which is,
Yeah.
pretty big deal. And then he taught at some pretty prestigious schools before kind of shifting gears and going nomadic. That's a pretty interesting path, and it really suggests someone who's really dedicated to their craft, maybe even above like a more traditional career path.
Okay, so let's dive in a little bit more here. And we've got this great collection of Camblin's own quotes that you sent, which really give us a window into his mind. One that really stood out to me was his focus on the bright gray that he saw, where science and magic intersect. Like he was looking for what's essential in both the atom and, in magic. What's your take on that?
I think what's really interesting there is that he's trying to connect these seemingly opposite things. It suggests a mind that wasn't satisfied with strict boundaries. He was really trying to find a more unified view of reality. And this bright gray, it's not just a compromise, it's more like a space where the rational and the intuitive can work together. And I think that's a really central theme to his whole approach.
And that connects so well with his emphasis on common sense and what he called the perfectly average view.
Hmm.
His idea was that if you have this grounded outlook, you can actually see the miracles in both the scientific and magical sides of things. It's almost like he's saying that wonder isn't this exotic thing, something we can find in the everyday if we really look.
Right. By accepting the ordinary, you open yourself up to the extraordinary. You see this idea in a lot of Eastern philosophies that emphasize the importance of the little details of life.
He also says, and this is pretty direct, that the sixth sense is, without a doubt, it's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, it is. And it fits with that mystical part of his persona.
Yeah.
It seems like he had a strong belief in intuition and maybe even personal experiences that went beyond just logic or our senses.
Looking through these quotes, we see this connection to nature popping up again and again. He talks about finding something in nature that completes you, and then the importance of surrendering to that.
That theme of surrender is really key. I think it implies a willingness to let go of control and let nature influence him, both in his life and maybe even in his art, trusting his gut and the natural qualities of his materials.
And he really stresses the importance of just being and balancing. He even talks about the interplay of being for and against something.
Mm-hmm.
And he says this helps us keep a grip on reality in silence and move away from pain. It sounds like a very personal philosophy for navigating life.
The concept of balance is so fundamental to many philosophies. It's interesting that he recognizes those internal tensions that push and pull this being for and against. It points to a pretty complex understanding of himself and the world. He doesn't shy away from that.
I also found it fascinating how his view on art itself seemed to change over time. He talks about moving away from that traditional art for art's sake to something much more personal. Art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake. What do you make of that shift?
Well, I think it points to a deeper, more personal reason for creating his art. It's no longer just about aesthetics or theories. It's about something much more essential to his existence and maybe a bigger reflection on what art can offer us when we're facing challenges.
There's also this instruction he gives that really caught my eye. Step off the train of thought to find the power that is no power. That's a pretty Zen statement, don't you think?
It is. It reminds me of meditation and the idea of moving beyond our usual way of thinking to access a different kind of awareness. It's a power that comes from stillness, not force or control.
And then he kind of contrasts thinking and doing. When you think, don't act. When you act, don't think. It's like he's saying you need to be completely present in whatever you're doing, no hesitation, no overthinking.
That's such a good point. I think it's about staying focused and effective. If you're thinking, let the thoughts flow, don't jump into action. And when you need to act, just trust your instincts and your preparation. Don't second guess yourself.
We also have these beautiful, almost poetic descriptions of nature and
Yeah.
the cosmos like waving to him through leaves, these vivid images of sunlight and shadows. It really makes you feel like he was so in tune with his surroundings.
It does. Those moments of heightened awareness seem so important to his process. It's like he's constantly absorbing the energy and patterns of the world around him, finding inspiration in even the smallest things.
His thoughts on arguing and communication are really interesting too. He says that looking and listening are much better than arguing. And he makes this distinction that arguing or even agreeing might teach you something, but it doesn't necessarily lead to real communication. What do you think he's getting at there?
I think he's pointing out the difference between just debating and truly understanding someone. Real communication goes beyond words. It's about being present, being empathetic, and really seeing things from the other person's perspective, not just trying to win.
And then we have his take on revolution versus evolution. He says revolution often comes from a lack of understanding, whereas evolution is rooted in understanding, and that ultimately balance is something we find in our own minds.
It's a really thoughtful take on change, don't you think? He's favoring gradual internal transformation that's based on understanding rather than sudden external changes that might be misguided. It really aligns with his emphasis on self-awareness.
He also talks about this difference between believing and knowing how many people just live with the belief system they were raised with. But mystics, he says, they come to know something else through their experiences.
It's that classic distinction between just accepting something and actually experiencing it firsthand. It's a core idea in mystical traditions. It's about going beyond intellectual understanding to a deeper personal realization.
And he believes that we can actively train ourselves to be more open rather than closed off in our perception. I love that idea that we can actually change how we experience the world.
It's definitely empowering. It means our capacity for experiencing the world isn't set in stone. We can actively cultivate it by being more mindful and making a conscious effort.
He has a pretty strong opinion on cynicism. He calls it a type of creativity gone destructive and ego-oriented. That's a pretty harsh assessment.
Yeah, it is. It suggests that cynicism, even though it pretends to be sophisticated, can actually block real creativity and genuine connection.
He also says that we lose that sense of magic when we try to understand everything with our heads instead of actually knowing it. Again, it's that idea of going beyond intellectual comprehension.
Right. It reinforces that idea that we can't grasp everything with logic alone. Staying open to wonder and the unknown is essential for a full human experience.
Camblin also encourages a kind of naive approach to art making. He says we should try to let go of all that baggage from art history and what the critics say. He wanted to get back to a state of not knowing when he was creating.
That's a classic artistic desire for pure originality, a connection to that initial spark of creation without the pressure of expectations or trends.
And for him, drawing was a form of nonverbal communication, a path to discovery. He even breaks it down into different methods: action, experiment, slow analytic, and conceptual. It's clear he saw so much potential in that one medium.
Yeah, that breakdown shows how multifaceted drawing can be. It can be immediate and intuitive or slow and meticulous, and it can even be used to express complex ideas.
He talks about finding your own mystic switch, that unique thing that triggers a sense of truth or deeper understanding for you.
It's about the personal and subjective nature of insight. What rings true for one person might not for another. So it's about learning to recognize your own internal signals.
He presents this interesting idea that you have to try to fail to succeed, and even when you do succeed, it'll eventually lead to another kind of failure. It seems like he valued the journey over any fixed destination.
Totally, it's about embracing experimentation, accepting setbacks as part of learning, and recognizing that growth comes from the process itself, not just the end result.
This next one is really profound. Everyone is a mirror, and that is magic. What a powerful statement about connection.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It speaks to how interconnected we all are and the idea that we can learn so much about ourselves by seeing our reflection in others.
He makes a distinction between magic for power, which he saw as negative, and magic for seeing or understanding, which he saw as positive.
Yeah, that really highlights his focus on perception and insight as the true value of the mystical. Not about control or manipulation, but about understanding.
And he describes real seeing as deceptive in a way, almost like a whirlpool of relationships. It's a pretty complex idea.
It suggests that true perception isn't straightforward. It can reveal layers of complexity that we don't see at first, leading to a much deeper, maybe even overwhelming understanding of reality.
He also wrestled with this tension in art between the need for novelty and the artist's own need for technique and skill. It sounds like he felt torn between what people expected and his own artistic integrity.
Yeah, that's a classic struggle for artists, especially today, with this pressure to constantly create new things. It's about balancing that demand with the need for exploration and refinement.
He mentions how the symbolist artists believe that explaining something takes away its power, which again reinforces this idea that overanalyzing art can diminish it.
It's about letting art speak for itself,
Mhm.
and acknowledging that words can't fully capture its meaning.
Later in life, he seemed to become more accepting. He talks about making the best of things and even saying there are no real mistakes, only opportunities to learn and trust your gut. That sounds like wisdom that comes with experience.
It does. It's a mature perspective on life and the creative process, embracing imperfections and seeing challenges as part of growth.
He connects pride to falling, almost like a cause and effect, and then suggests that humility can reverse that. It's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, it's a nuanced observation about the dangers of ego and the possibility of redemption through humility.
He also introduces this concept of the hologram, really emphasizing interconnectedness and the idea that things become clearer when we see ourselves as part of a larger whole.
It's another example of his holistic worldview, this sense of reality as a web of interconnected relationships.
He thinks about the universe as either finite or in a steady state, and then concludes that it's all part of the dream of how it works. It's a very open-minded perspective.
I think it shows a philosophical acceptance of the mysteries of the universe and the limits of what we can know.
He describes time travel at the speed of enlightenment as basically being able to observe the world with a heightened awareness. It's a beautiful metaphor.
It really is. It connects inner transformation with a shift in perception so you can experience the present moment more fully.
He also notes that the path of least resistance can be pretty complex for us humans. We tend to overcomplicate things, don't we?
Absolutely. We make things so much harder than they need to be. Nature usually finds the simplest way.
He sees life as this cycle of beginning-ending, and then the next step emphasizing that we need both action and a connection to our past and future.
It highlights the dynamic nature of life always changing and moving forward.
He reflects on futility and provocation in art, but ultimately puts freedom above all else. I think that resonates with a lot of artists.
It definitely speaks to his independent spirit and his commitment to creative and personal freedom.
There's some powerful imagery in his later quotes: a phoenix frozen, waiting for the fire, and the realization that the meaning is in living itself, not in some empty rib cage at the end. These are really striking images.
They're powerful metaphors for potential waiting to be unleashed, for transformation, and for the idea that life is about the journey itself, not just the destination.
He quotes Alan Watts on the vastness of connection, William James on the power of an idea, and how belief can shape reality, and Sartre on just the basic acts of being and thinking. It's clear he was engaging with a lot of different philosophies.
Yeah, he was reading widely, and these quotes give us valuable context for his own ideas, showing how he was influenced by some of the great thinkers of his time.
We also see references to a Zen proverb about knowing and telling Bergson's ideas about intuition and the unconscious mind, Teilhard de Chardin's vision of oneness, Lamarck's concept of gradual change, Koestler's thoughts on courage and originality, and Jung's perspectives on chaos or the role of play in creation and the power of imagination. It's really a rich mix of influences.
It shows how intellectually curious he was, constantly exploring different perspectives on creativity, consciousness, and what it means to be human.
And then we can't forget this incredible list of literary references, quotes from The Magus by John Fowles about identity and self-acceptance, Dostoevsky on unspoken fears and connection selling, Salinger on an artist's pursuit of perfection, Updike on the dedication to craft, Barth on the idea of value, Durrell on art as a way to process pain, and Huxley on the ever-changing nature of life. It's a really impressive reading list.
These literary references give us even more insight into the ideas that shaped his artistic vision, these themes of identity perception and the role of the artist.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Camblin's idea of the ecology of art. He proposed that an artist just doing his own thing could actually contribute to a sense of balance in a world that's gone a bit off track just by being authentic. What's your take on that?
I think it's a really interesting perspective. It's like he's saying that the artist's individual pursuit isn't separate from the world. It's a necessary counterpoint to the negative forces out there.
We also have these great metaphors he used to describe his creative process: dissolving images, juggling dust motes, drawing on a frosted window, and this feeling that the truth he was searching for was in other artists' work, but not his own. It really gives you a glimpse into his experience.
Yeah, they paint a picture of the creative process as something fluid, frustrating, and ultimately mysterious. It's about the interplay of intention execution and the unpredictable results.
Camblin also had some strong opinions about consumer art and this pressure to be new and novel all the time. He questioned this shift from preciousness to more participatory art and the compromises that might come with that.
It sounds like he was concerned about the superficiality of the art market and he yearned for a deeper, more meaningful engagement with art, something beyond trends.
And we even get a bit of his humor when he talks about teaching at Rice. He says first he thought he knew what he was doing, then he had to admit he didn't, and finally he actually started teaching. It's a pretty relatable experience for teachers, I think.
It is. It's a funny but insightful look at the unexpected realities of teaching and the dynamic between teacher and student.
All right, let's focus on this artwork. In lieu of wings, we've got the YouTube transcript and the book description to work with. So the image we get is this grounded reptilian creature, no wings on a textured earthy surface. And there's an inscription that seems to have this sense of both acceptance and longing. What's your first impression of that?
Well, the first thing that jumps out is that yearning, despite the lack of wings. The creature is stuck between this earthbound reality and a desire to fly. And the textures, the landscape around it all emphasize this feeling of being rooted but surrounded by potential.
The YouTube analysis makes this connection to Zen philosophy, saying that the lack of wings isn't a limitation, but an opportunity to embrace the present moment. What do you think of that interpretation?
It fits really well with Zen teachings about acceptance, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. The creature's groundedness becomes a source of strength, not something to despair over.
It also draws a parallel to hexagram 12 in the I Ching, which represents standstill or stagnation, suggesting that this inability to ascend is a necessary pause before renewal.
I like that idea of stillness being crucial for change. Even when we feel stuck, something is happening beneath the surface, preparing for growth and transformation.
And connecting this further, the analysis links it to Taoism, the idea that being bent is how you become straight, finding potential and limitation.
Right, it's about that duality and the transformative nature of things. What looks like a weakness can actually be what leads to strength and development.
The overall interpretation is that In Lieu of Wings is a meditation on being human, our longing for things we don't have, and the need to find meaning in the present moment.
It's like the creature reflects our own desires and limitations, making us think about how we respond to those constraints and where we find our purpose.
And they see the lack of wings as maybe sparking innovation. Those rough textures and earthy colors represent the raw beginnings of creativity.
That's a great point. Limitations can force us to be more creative to find new and unexpected solutions.
The book excerpt gives us some great visual details. This armor-like quality, speckled pigments, fluid shadows, and the creature almost blending into the landscape. It has this ancient, primal feeling to it.
Yeah, the texture and layers of paint really bring it to life. You can almost feel it. It feels both organic and fossilized, like it's both from the earth and preserved in time.
The reviewer points out some art historical connections to the surrealists like Delhi and Tanguy, but with a darker palette. And they mention the textured surfaces you see in Kiefer and Schnabel.
Yeah, those connections help us understand where Camblin fits in art history while also highlighting his unique style. That darkness and those rough textures add to the mystery in the atmosphere.
They also mention Max Ernst's experimental techniques and those fantastical creatures by Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo, adding to this sense of the subconscious and the symbolic.
It reinforces that dreamlike quality and the exploration of deeper themes that's happening in Lieu of Wings.
Even the title, In Lieu of Wings, suggests lost substitution transformation from flight to grounding. It's about resilience and adaptation.
Yeah, it perfectly captures that central tension between what's missing and finding a new way to be in the world.
The reviewer even interprets those textures as scars or weathering, suggesting maybe a post-apocalyptic setting that makes us think about survival.
It's like adding a backstory to the artwork, hinting at struggle and endurance, making it more than just a static image.
So In Lieu of Wings is this mix of a surrealist puzzle and an ecological relic, a meditation on how we adapt or decay when we can't ascend. It's a piece that really makes you think.
It's a powerful and multi-layered work that stays with you. It makes you reflect on your own limitations, aspirations, and what transformation really means.
Now, the book review of The Art of Everything presents this idea of art as questions disguised as images and philosophy as incomplete answers. It really highlights how Camblin could turn everyday things into symbols with deeper meanings.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary of his approach using visual metaphors to explore those big questions about life and existence.
The reviewer calls his drawings paradoxes made visible and blueprints for ideas. They talk about his use of illusion and vanishing acts to think about impermanence.
That image of a paradox brought to life visually is so cool. It shows how Camblin could challenge our perceptions and make us see the world in new ways.
The review also mentions his exploration of traps like fear time or self-imposed limits and the stories they tell. And it touches on stillness and whether it means being stuck or finding peace.
These are such universal themes, and Camblin's work gives us space to think about them in our own lives.
And in the end, the review says the book doesn't give you answers, but instead offers questions and riddles for the reader to work through.
And that's what makes this kind of art so powerful. It encourages you to think for yourself and discover your own meaning.
The foreword to Zen in the Art of Enlightenment, Volume 1, gives this interesting perspective on art history as a way to understand how human perception has evolved, and it connects art to Zen Buddhism and the I Ching.
Those connections are so insightful. It emphasizes Camblin's interest in intuition, interconnectedness, and the cyclical nature of things, all of which show up in his art.
It describes art as a portal to higher awareness, prompting contemplation, and this ekphrastic dialogue, which is basically self-inquiry through observation.
So engaging with art becomes an active dialogue, a conversation that leads to self-discovery. I think that's key to understanding how Camblin wanted his art to be experienced.
The foreword also mentions archetypal themes in art, the evolution of our inner landscapes, and the power of combining visual art philosophy and reflection for growth.
It shows how art can be transformative, how it can reveal our inner world and help us grow.
So let's recap some of the key details from Camblin's biography. He was born in 1928 in Oklahoma, became a Fulbright scholar in Italy, taught at different universities, and then in 1976 he chose a nomadic lifestyle, funding his travels by selling his art.
It's clear that his life experiences really shaped his artistic vision. That decision to go nomadic was a turning point. It shows how dedicated he was to his art.
We learned that from 1950 to 1974, he mainly created these private drawings and writings that weren't meant to be shown publicly. It's like a window into his raw creativity.
It's fascinating to think about those early works and how they might reveal the development of his ideas and his process.
Critics noticed his later shift to organic forms, his interest in life cycles, and his unique way of combining drawing and watercolor. He also pioneered mousses volantes in the 70s, inspired by Dada and surrealism, and he often collaborated with other artists, even signing his work as anonymous. Can you tell us a bit more about these mousses volantes?
Well, mousses volantes translates to flying flies, and it's actually those little floaters you sometimes see in your vision, those little specks or shadows, especially when you're looking at something bright. Camblin's mousses volantes were likely inspired by Dadaism and surrealism, and they probably explored this phenomenon in abstract and unexpected ways, maybe mimicking those floaters with shapes and forms. He also really liked to play with the idea of the artist's ego being less important. His anonymity and collaborations really point to that.
That makes a lot of sense. So his early life in Ponca City, Oklahoma, during the Marland era, seems to have stuck with him. The Marland estate and that pioneer woman statue appear in some of his later work, and apparently The Wizard of Oz was a big influence too. It's amazing how those early experiences shape an artist.
I think those details about his childhood are really important for understanding the roots of his imagination.
We also find out he was a huge reader, especially Emerson, the I Ching, and haiku. His time in Italy and his visits to the Uffizi Gallery and the Capuchin Catacombs also had a big impact. Those abstract figures he saw there seem to have resonated with him.
His literary and artistic influences are woven throughout his work. You can see how they shaped both his ideas and his style.
His Birth of Venus piece was actually a tribute to KPFT radio, and Flora had all this hidden imagery. He exhibited widely even at the Chicago Art Institute, and he even had a stint as a map maker before he focused on teaching. And his move to Rice in Houston was because he felt the art scene there was more open and vibrant.
You can really see how he engaged with the world around him, his playful side, and his search for the right creative environment.
He created this St. Bambola series where he tried to turn off his myth-making machine, like he wanted to move away from those established narratives.
Yeah.
And even though he had a busy exhibition schedule when he arrived in Houston, he was critical of galleries and museums, he really valued the whole experience for the artist.
He clearly had a complicated relationship with the art world, and he always wanted to push the boundaries.
He believed in faith and good work, and he talked about the cyclical nature of the art game. He also had this idea of turning stumbling blocks into stepping stones, which he depicted in paintings with jars of water. And his Scarecrow series, inspired by Günter Grass, became a symbol of renewal and metamorphosis.
Those recurring themes and images help us decipher his symbolic language. He was always exploring transformation, resilience, and how we make meaning.
He started using text in his later Scarecrow drawings, both to conceal and reveal things. It's almost like he was questioning the way we talk about art and emphasizing the importance of experiencing it directly. He wanted viewers to engage with his work like a puzzle with hidden meanings.
Yeah, it's like he was inviting viewers to participate in the interpretation, to become active in the process of discovery.
So his early work included social protest art, which then blended with non-objectivity. His time in Italy brought in Byzantine and Renaissance influences, and he started making large-scale drawings as finished pieces, often with visible corrections. He even wanted to combine Hugo van der Gogh's and Goya in the 60s.
His style was always evolving. He drew from so many different sources and constantly pushed himself.
In the 70s, he intentionally tried to make art mystical to blow our minds, exploring themes of life cycles and metamorphosis, referencing Freud, Chirico, Grunewald, Kazantzakis, and Grass. And he always seemed to have this sense of humor about it all.
It's like he was taking his art to a deeper level, exploring more philosophical and psychological ideas.
And in the 80s, he combined drawing and watercolor in a way that revealed deeper layers. He wanted viewers to look beyond the surface, and he used ambiguity so that new meanings could emerge over time.
He was creating art that could be appreciated on multiple levels and that would continue to reveal itself over time.
And finally, we have this quote from Earl Staley about Camblin's death, their friendship, their shared studio B&E productions, their collaborations, and how hard it was to keep track of Camblin in his later years. It really shows how connected he was to the art community, yet also elusive.
It's a touching glimpse into Camlin's life and the mark he left on people. The fact that he's hard to pin down just adds to the mystery.
So we've taken this incredible journey through the world of Bob Camblin, exploring his enigmatic personality, his evolving artistic philosophy, this fascinating intersection of art and ideas, and how he saw the viewer as an active participant in creating meaning.
He was a truly unique artist who challenged us to think differently and engage more deeply.
And here's a final thought for you to consider. Given Bob Camblin's own artistic journey and his habit of questioning everything, what train of thought might you step off of, even for a moment, to gain a new perspective on your own interests or the world around you? We encourage you to keep exploring those connections and questions that his art brings up. This deep dive is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover in the world of Bob Camblin and the ideas he explored.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Keep questioning and keep discovering.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep those deep dives coming.
Absolutely.
See ya.